Alright folks, buckle up because tonight we're diving into a story so bizarre, so ludicrous, that you'd swear we stole it from the plot of a rejected 80s action comedy. Picture this, a tale where capitalism and communism collide in the most unexpected way, involving submarines, destroyers, and a fizzy drink. Intrigued? You should be. We're talking about the time Pepsi, yes, the soda company, briefly owned a chunk of the Soviet Navy. That's right, the same company that brings you sugary carbonated bliss once had a fleet of warships at its disposal. You heard that right, submarines, destroyers, frigates, the whole shebang, all with a Pepsi logo slapped on the side. Imagine cruising the high seas with a cola in hand, commanding a naval fleet. Sounds like a fever dream, doesn't it? Okay, maybe not the logo part, but you get the idea. The story is so wild it almost feels like a parody, but it's all true. This wasn't some Cold War fever dream, this actually happened. The Cold War era was filled with strange and unexpected events, but this one takes the cake, or should we say, the soda. How did a beverage company end up as a temporary naval power? The answer lies in a series of unusual business deals and geopolitical maneuvers that could only happen during the Cold War. Well, to understand this tale of capitalism and communism colliding over a fizzy drink, we need to rewind back to the Cold War. It was a time when the world was divided into two ideological camps, and every move was a strategic one. The year is 1972, Richard Nixon's rocking out to Elvis, and the Soviet Union, well, they're not exactly rocking. The Soviet economy was struggling and they were looking for ways to improve their international standing and economic situation. Enter Pepsi, a company eager to expand its market. They saw an opportunity in the Soviet Union, a market that was largely untapped by Western companies. Through a series of negotiations, Pepsi managed to strike a deal that would allow them to sell their products in the USSR. But there was a catch. The Soviet Union didn't have the hard currency to pay for the Pepsi. Instead, they offered something else, something that would make this story legendary. They offered a fleet of naval ships as part of the payment, and that's how, for a brief moment in history, Pepsi became the owner of a Soviet naval fleet. It's a story that perfectly encapsulates the bizarre and unpredictable nature of the Cold War era. So next time you crack open a can of Pepsi, remember this wild chapter in history. It's a reminder that truth is often stranger than fiction. The Soviet Union, despite its fearsome military image, had a bit of a cash flow problem. The ruble, their official currency, was not exactly the darling of the international financial community. In fact, it was more like the unwanted guest at a party that everyone tries to avoid. The ruble was practically useless outside the borders of the Soviet Union. Their currency, the ruble, was about as welcome as a KGB agent at a birthday party. It was a currency that no one really wanted to deal with, and for good reason. The ruble was not freely convertible on international markets, which meant that it couldn't be easily exchanged for other currencies. No one outside the Iron Curtain wanted it, and for good reason. The ruble's lack of convertibility made it a non-starter for international trade. This was a significant problem for the Soviet Union, which needed to import various goods and services to sustain its economy and population. It wasn't freely convertible on international markets. This lack of convertibility meant that the Soviet Union had to find alternative ways to engage in international trade. They couldn't just buy what they needed with rubles. They had to get creative. This made trading for things the Soviets actually needed, like, grain to feed their people, a tad difficult. The Soviet Union was often in need of agricultural products, machinery, and technology from the West, but paying for these with rubles was out of the question. Enter the barter system, a glorious throwback to the days before money where you could literally trade chickens for shoes if the mood struck you. The Soviets had to resort to bartering, trading goods and services directly without the use of money. This system allowed them to bypass the limitations of their non-convertible currency. And what did the Soviets have in abundance that the West couldn't resist? The Soviet Union had a variety of goods to offer, from industrial products to raw materials, but there was one product that stood out above the rest. No, not nuclear warheads, although that would have been interesting. While the Soviet Union was indeed a superpower with a formidable arsenal, their most effective trade item was far less menacing. The answer, my friends, was vodka. Specifically, Stolichnaya vodka, a brand that had gained international acclaim. This vodka was not just a drink, it was a symbol of Russian culture and craftsmanship. Specifically, Stolichnaya vodka, the kind that could knock you colder than a Siberian winter. Stolichnaya became a valuable commodity in international trade, allowing the Soviet Union to acquire the goods and services it needed. In a world where their currency was worthless, vodka became the liquid gold that kept the Soviet economy afloat. Pepsi, always the entrepreneurial spirit, saw an opportunity in this vodka-fueled predicament. They struck a deal with the thirsty comrades. Pepsi gets to sell their sugary goodness in the USSR, and in exchange the Soviets get hard currency, and you guessed it, more Stoli to keep the party going. This was a win-win. At least until the hangovers kicked in. This deal was huge. It marked the first time a Western consumer product breached the Iron Curtain, a tiny crack in the wall of communism. Little did anyone know that this fizzy little foot in the door would eventually lead to something far more substantial, a fleet of warships. Fast forward to 1989. The world is witnessing a period of significant change and upheaval. The Cold War is nearing its end, and the geopolitical landscape is shifting dramatically. The Soviet Union is starting to look like a car that's been held together with duct tape and hope for far too long. The economy is sputtering and the infrastructure is crumbling. Factories are closing and the once mighty industrial machine is grinding to a halt. The people are feeling the pinch, and the government is scrambling to find solutions. Gorbachev's reforms are in full swing, with policies like perestroika and glasnost aiming to revitalize the economy and open up the society. However, these changes are also causing significant unrest and uncertainty. The old guard is resistant to change, and the new policies are not yielding immediate results. The once mighty empire is on the brink of collapse. Nationalist movements are gaining momentum, and the satellite states are pushing for independence. The iron grip of the Soviet Union is weakening, and the world is watching with bated breath. But amidst this chaos, Pepsi, ever the opportunist, decides it's time to renegotiate their Soviet soda contract. Pepsi had been one of the few Western companies to penetrate the Iron Curtain, and now they saw an opportunity to solidify their presence in the Soviet market. Now, the Soviets are fresh out of cash. The economic hardship is evident everywhere, from empty store shelves to long lines for basic necessities. The government is desperate for foreign currency, but their coffers are empty, and even their vodka reserves are running low. This is a significant issue in a country where vodka is not just a drink but a cultural staple. The shortage is a stark indicator of the depth of the economic crisis, but what they do have is a whole lot of military hardware they can't really afford anymore. The Soviet military, once a symbol of power and might, is now a financial burden. Tanks, planes, and warships are sitting idle with no funds to maintain or operate them. So in a move that would make even the most seasoned arms dealer raise an eyebrow, the Soviets propose an unconventional solution. They offer to trade their surplus military equipment in exchange for Pepsi products. It's a deal that sounds almost too bizarre to be true. The Soviets offer Pepsi a truly unique trade warships. These are not just any warships, but a fleet that includes destroyers, frigates, and even a submarine. It's an unprecedented deal that highlights the desperate measures the Soviet Union is willing to take. That's right. Pepsi, for a brief, glorious moment, became the proud owner of a Soviet naval squadron. This quirky chapter in history underscores the surreal nature of the late Cold War era, where a soft drink company could momentarily wield naval power. We can only imagine the boardroom meeting where this went down. "We can offer you destroyers, cruisers, even a few submarines," the Soviet negotiator probably said, chain-smoking nervously. "Submarines?" The Pepsi exec likely replied, "What the heck are we going to do with submarines? You could sell them? Or, start your own private navy," the Soviet guy might have mumbled, now sweating profusely. The reality, of course, was a bit less exciting. Pepsi, while momentarily a military power on paper, wasn't about to start challenging NATO for control of the high seas. They quickly sold the ships off to a Swedish scrap metal company, proving that even in the topsy-turvy world of international trade, there's no beating a good old-fashioned cash payout. The great Soviet Pepsi-fueled naval swap was ultimately a footnote in a much larger story, the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. By 1991, the once mighty empire had crumbled, replaced by a patchwork of independent states all eager to embrace the wonders of capitalism, including, of course, the sweet, sweet nectar of American soda. The vodka for Pepsi deal, a symbol of Cold War weirdness and capitalist ingenuity, went the way of the hammer and sickle. But the story didn't end there. Oh no, because where there's a market thirsty for carbonated beverages, there's bound to be competition. With the Soviet Union out of the picture, Coca-Cola, Pepsi's eternal rival, saw a chance to finally conquer the final frontier of the Cola War's Russia. They flooded the newly opened market with their product, capitalizing on the thirst for all things Western. Pepsi, despite its head start, found itself in a surprisingly fierce battle for the hearts, minds, and stomachs of Russian consumers. The Cola Wars, once fought on the battleground of American advertising, had now spilled onto the streets of Moscow and beyond. It was a marketing melee, a capitalist clash of titans vying for dominance in a land once ruled by communism. The story of Pepsi's Soviet naval adventure is a wild reminder that in the world of global commerce, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. It's a tale of Cold War maneuvering, capitalist opportunism, and the enduring power of a good beverage, even if that beverage is technically 90% sugar and water. But beyond the sheer absurdity of it all, the story also highlights the complex relationship between business and geopolitics. Pepsi, by cleverly navigating the treacherous waters of the Soviet economy, managed to briefly become a player on the world stage, albeit in a way no one could have predicted. So, the next time you crack open a can of Pepsi, take a moment to appreciate the bizarre history behind that sugary fizz. It's a story that reminds us that in a world where fortunes can change with the pop of a bottle cap, adaptability and a willingness to embrace the unexpected can be the most valuable assets of all. And who knows, maybe someday in some other corner of the world, we'll witness another equally strange and wonderful chapter in the ongoing saga of capitalism's quest to quench the world's thirst.